Hey guys, this is Paul from Smart Easy DIY. Today I wanted to show you how I built my own cabinets for our food pantry. These are for the base cabinets. We're going to do shelves above it, which I'll cover in a future video. Man, cabinets are expensive, and you probably realize that if you're watching this video. That's why I decided to build my own. I built them in place. Hopefully watching this video will be helpful to give you some ideas for the things how I did it and some mistakes that I made that I can pass along to you guys so you don't make the same ones. I will have part 2 of this cabinet build coming out soon after this one, so be sure to watch out for that. I did a poll on my channel and you guys mostly voted for having a 2-part video instead of one really long one. So that's what I decided to do. Alright guys, let's get right to it. So this is what our room looks like when you walk into it. I don't have a door on it yet, but that's going to be a future project. So this right here, we kind of already had always planned to do this in here when we built the house. We just never got around to it. So right here on the left side is going to be an upright freezer or a fridge. We haven't decided which one yet. And then it's going to be kind of U-shaped like I had showed in the picture. And then on the right is either the freezer or the fridge, depending how we want to switch it up. So I'm probably going to do open shelving above that because we have 10-foot ceiling, so lots of room for that. Yeah, so we ended up pulling the floor out as far as we needed to get the cabinet in here. Then I just went to Lowe's. That's where I ended up getting the 2x3s. And you can see we got it all torn out here. I'm starting to make some marks. So here, I wanted to show you, I'm out in my shed. Excuse the mess. It's really cold out, but it's the only spot I have that it's not snowing and blowing when I'm doing this. But what I wanted to show you here quick is I just ripped a piece of treated 1/2-inch strip to put on the bottom. It was cheaper that way than to buy something else like treated plywood. And I wanted to put that down just as a precaution because this here is going to be sitting on the concrete even though it has a plastic liner underneath it. Okay, so just getting it laid out in here, getting some marks on the wall. So this mark here is where I just laid it out for rough framing. It's going to get some plywood on the sides, so the plywood goes on the outside of that. So I'm leaving a gap here on the side for the freezer over on that side, and there's going to be a fridge over here on the other side. So I just had to pull the flooring back to there, and then this is the framing for the top. I actually moved it up 1 inch because it wasn't quite tall enough for the shelf space that we're going to have. We didn't have enough room for a 5-gallon bucket, so that's why we raised it up. Then here's where I put the treated on the bottom right here. You can see that's where I'm going to rest that down right on top of the plastic in here because there's concrete underneath. And that's going to go all along the bottom. Then this one goes all along the top, and then we're going to do something in the middle where it needs it. So I just wanted to show you a few time lapses throughout the video here of what I did. So I'm fastening this with GRK 3-inch screws that are made for treated lumber. They're the good ones, the GRKs. I really like those. Those and the U2 fasteners are both really good screws in my opinion, just from using them. So I'm doing the top and the bottom using the level, making sure that it's nice and level as I go across there. So it's working good. So I got the top and bottom supports installed here. And I figured it doesn't really matter where I put the screws in, where I put the joints on the 2x. So I just made them the same, and I stayed back at least 2 sections. That way the piece on the end isn't quite as short. I do apologize. A lot of this is just me putting screws in and stuff, but I figured it might be helpful for some of you to see how I did it, like what my processes were and stuff. But anyway, it's nice when you're doing level across corner. You can double check it. Even if your walls are level, you want to double check it, and it's awesome when it turns out like that. So it's hard to know sometimes what to talk about with these different time lapses going on, just watching myself work. But I didn't know if I should put music in. Sometimes I put music in and people complain about music. I try to keep it quiet if I do, so maybe I'll experiment with doing a little more background music on some of these because they are quite lengthy. Also, some of you may not be aware, but I am on Instagram at SmartEasyDIY, and I share a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff in my stories daily and projects like this. So if you were on Instagram and following me, you would be the first ones to see when I do projects like this. So if you want, come along and follow me on there. That'd be fun to have you over there. So it's just kind of a different way of showing things and a little more personal if you want to message me and stuff like that with questions. So I'm just getting the frame put together here. You probably could tell in the time lapse is pretty much what I was doing, getting that screwed together. So I wanted to show you on the bottom down here. I didn't run treated all the way underneath just because I wanted it to make one 2x4 8 reach all the way, because I believe I was able to get about 5 strips out of there if I remember correctly with the saw cuts in there. And the other part of the cabinet is going to come across there, so that's going to support it, the front of the cabinet. so I didn't feel there was a need to get it all the way across there. So the main part of the cabinet is going to be supported. So that's just my situation with having a concrete floor. For this, even though my walls aren't perfectly square, I'm using a rafter square and making sure that they're square off of each other when I go ahead and do my measurement off of the wall to get the one going across there. So just want to double check it. That's what I did, and it worked out pretty good. This Kreg jig clamp I'm going to show later in the video because I'm going to use it quite a bit, but I found it actually works pretty good for when I'm doing this face frame part here, because it kind of keeps it from moving one way. It doesn't really help it the other way, but it keeps it at least in position the one way, so it's pretty easy to fasten. So I really highly recommend having one of those clamps. So the plywood for the bottom and the shelves and the end panels I got at Lowe's. This is a maple hardwood plywood, 3/4 inch. I decided to go heavy duty, $57 a sheet roughly at the time of making this video. And then the 1/2 inch were about $10 a sheet cheaper than that. And these 1/2 inch ones were for the end panels by the fridge and the freezer of the cabinet. And so yeah, it worked out pretty good. They rip it in half for you. It's easier for transportation. It was for me. And I'm going to end up pre-ripping it more accurately when I'm done. This part I was just going to tell you that I didn't put treated underneath these supports as well, except for on the long part of the back wall here. I did one in the middle just because I had a little bit extra, but otherwise I didn't worry about it because the front and the back are supported with treated. So, and I ran out, so that's why I did that. So just the way that the plywood layout came out on mine particular situation here is I was able to do that, and I can get a full sheet if I splice it right there. And then on this side on the right, I can run it into that corner so it goes past. And then this one just butts into it, and by doing that, I can get it in one full sheet by doing all of it. I put an extra block in here to support the corner going that way. That way it's fully supported. Just to show you, you don't have to have everything perfect when you're doing projects. I'm just working out of my 10x16 shed here. You can see I got random stuff sitting everywhere. I got an old recliner here, which, I mean, hey, I got to take a break now and then, you know, but I don't have enough room here for everything, so a ladder is kind of shoved in that corner. It normally sits over here, but I got my saw, which I have a bunch of stuff from cutting in here, and I'm just kind of making a mess out of my shed anyway, just so I can do this project. And I had a couple old towels and shirts that I put down just to protect the face side of the plywood, because I'm actually going to share another tip with you. So this is the not as nice side of plywood. So if you cut with that up, like you cut it upside down basically, then it does a cleaner cut on the face, on the nice side that you're going to see. So like this is the face right here, the nice part. So you would flip it over and cut it from there, because the blade makes a cleaner cut on the part as it's like entering the wood, if that makes sense. Here's a good example of the cut I was just talking about. See how it peeled up on that? It made some little slivers right there. On this face side, look at how clean that is compared. So that's the difference. It chips it up, and if it's down on the back side where you'll never see it, then that's what you want. Also, by the way, since I don't have my garage yet, this is actually that shed that I made. I made a video about it. It's a 10 by 16. It's a really kind of a nice size for most things. So I'll link to that right there if you want to check that shed build out. It was a really fun project to do. For this, I was going to mention again, this is how my plywood layout came. When I measured from the left side over to there, it was 7 feet, and it came out good with being half a sheet that way. And I was able to get this one, which was almost 5 feet, and then this one was about 3 feet by butting against it. I know it doesn't look symmetrical, but it worked out really good, and that way I didn't waste any material more than I had to for my particular one. Yours hopefully will come out better. This is actually a factory cut, so the cuts weren't perfect, and it's chipped out there, but it's going to get covered when the supports are in there. So I'm not too worried about it for a food pantry. I think it'll work just fine. But depending on what you're doing, you may want to get a little more particular with how the cuts fit. So to nail this down, I just use a finish nailer that I borrowed from work. It worked really good, so I wouldn't go out and buy one if I didn't have one. I'd probably use trim head screws or something, but since I did, I used some 2-inch finish nails. Can get away with 1.5 inch even. Would hold that just fine, but just to kind of show you what I did, that worked out good. So after I got the floor in there, I decided that I wanted to do some 1/4-inch maple plywood. It matches, and it was about $28 a sheet at Lowe's, so it was about $56 to do this because I needed 2 sheets to get it all covered up. And so I got those put in there, and you may wonder why I put the small pieces in the corner. It's because of the way the stud layout came out. I'll show you here in just a little bit when I get around from a different angle here. But I used a crown stapler to fasten them. It worked pretty good. You could use liquid nails or whatever you wanted to do. So you can see stud layout. If I went all the way with a full sheet first, I'd come out with just a little 6-inch strip there and barely be able to fasten it. With doing the small strips in the corner, I was able to get a bigger strip, and then I could fasten it better. And then, that's just how it worked out good for my particular stud layout. So of course it'll be different in your situation. But I really like how it turned out. It makes it look like a nice finished cabinet that way. It just protects the drywall because we're going to be shoving in heavy buckets in there and stuff. So it'll protect that. And I think for the price difference in the overall scheme of the project, $56 really wasn't that big of a thing to do that. And I think it looks a lot better and it'll hold up a lot better. So my personal recommendation, if you're doing a built-in in place, do it this way. That's my opinion. But there's some gaps there that weren't perfect either. If you're worried about them, you could use wood filler and fill them. I wasn't worried about them because they're going to be back in the corner where you'll never see it. And for my particular use, again, I'm just shoving buckets in there. So it really wasn't a concern to me. So you'll have to decide how you want to do that part. All right, so next I'm getting some supports put in here on this end and then on the other far end, which I'll show you in just a sec. Right there. All right, so I'm putting the middle shelf support in here. I'm just using a cabinet screw to fasten those. You could glue them if you wanted to as well, or liquid nail them, I suppose. This is just what I chose to do, and it seemed to work well. So again, any of this stuff you guys can do whatever you want to do. If it works out better for you, it's just to give you ideas of what I did. So I just used the 1.5 inch by 3/4, which is technically 1 by 2, and got it as narrow as possible. That way it didn't take up much room in the back, so the buckets can still slide all the way under in, and it worked out really good for me. So I'm out here at my workbench again, and I'm cutting the shelf for the middle of the cabinet. So what I wanted to show you, I'm cutting everything from the back side again so it doesn't chip up. And I didn't want it to chip up because the veneer on this is really thin on the face. So what I did is I just overcut a little bit because you're never going to see it down below. I overcut it a little bit and then finished it with a knife down below to make sure that it came out really well. So this is a middle one. This was a little bit of an extreme case, but I made so I would watch it and I came out to where I was close to going through, but not quite. Did the same thing here. I mean, it was through, but what I mean is that I didn't overcut it in on the underside. And then I also cut in this way and then overcut about 1/4 inch going this way. And then I was able to finish it out with a knife, and it looks really good from the other side. So that's just an option of something that you can do if you don't have a jigsaw or anything like that. And I'm afraid a jigsaw would chip up the face anyway. Check out my cuts from the front. See, they look really clean that way. So they should work just fine. I cut them just a little bit oversized around my supports because you'll never see them. So in a way, this was the trickiest part of the whole build, I feel like, getting this shelf put in here, because I had to get some of the cabinet built before I could get it in here. so I know where to level off of for my supports and stuff, because I wanted to notch it outside in my shed ahead of time where the supports are going to go, but I had to get it in here without too many supports in the top in the way. So it's kind of like threading a needle to get it in there, but I was able to do it. This is the biggest piece, so this is the main one I have to be concerned about. The little ones will go in there no problem. But I got it in there. I had leveled ahead of time. The marks worked out good. Now I can go ahead and get my supports put in once it's in place. So that was kind of the trickiest part. I made it a little bit oversized, the notches, just in case, so I didn't have any problems getting them in there. So you can try to cut them as perfect as possible, but if you use framing lumber like I did, they do vary just a little bit. So I gave myself just a little bit of room, and it worked out really well to do it that way. So I'm putting the middle support in right here. Now I did make a mistake here on this shelf, which I will discuss at some point in the video, but I would recommend keep the shelf at least a 1/4 inch back if you do put a hinge in the middle. My problem was I ended up doing 3 hinges, and it was in the way, so I ended up having to notch it back later. So I'd recommend don't make it as tight as I did to the front, the shelf. Leave yourself at least maybe a 1/2 inch to work with, just because then you won't interfere with the hinges at all. So for the shelf supports, initially I was going to do some metal supports, but I decided for strength, I think these will be stronger, so I just doubled them up underneath there. I made them the same height as the top of the shelf back there. At the bottom of the shelf, I should say. That way the measurements were the same. And I screwed them from the backside so you don't see the screws. And then on the face there, I'm planning to do some kind of poplar strip to hopefully finish that off a little better. So it is a little bit thicker. That's the only thing that I didn't like the looks of as much. It's a little thicker, but I think it's going to be nice and strong. And I thought about even putting metal supports where the two come together across there, but I think they're going to be just plenty fine, strong enough the way they are. So the other thing is I used some trim head screws to fasten this shelf width into place instead of nailing it like I did the bottom, which you can do either or if you want. One reason I did is because I didn't have the nailer anymore, and the other is I figured these will be, in case I would ever have to remove it for some reason, which I don't know why I would, but I ended up doing it with these, and they just have a really small head, so they really aren't very noticeable. And you could easily screw the bottom as well instead of just the shelf, but that's what I did. So here I'm just cutting and notching just to show you a little bit how that works. So that end one went in really nice and well. So the trickiest really was that big piece. So I don't know if you're going to have a similar situation as I did, but that's just something to think about. So overall, I feel like the cuts turned out pretty good and everything. You can see right there is where I was talking about. You could put a metal piece underneath if you wanted and put some short screws in if you wanted to support it a little better, but it seems plenty strong just from me pushing on it and stuff with being supported on both sides, and it's 3/4 inch plywood, so it is strong already. That's one reason I went with 3/4, because I'm going to be doing 5-gallon buckets like I said and stuff. So yeah, overall I'm really happy how it turned out. Some of the cuts aren't completely perfect, like when I notched it. It's hard, because you're dealing with drywall that's not perfect, and you're dealing with material that's not always quite perfect. And so if you're worried about it, you probably wouldn't be framing it with framing lumber anyway, but if you're worried about it after the fact, it's done in there, you could use wood filler or seal it up somehow, maybe, if you're worried about it. But I thought, it's better to have a little bit of room in there than to fight it when I'm getting it in there. So overall, I was happy with it. Just mainly wanted to show you how I did it for ideas for you guys. So then, now that I got that shelf in, now I can put all the top supports in for the countertop. So I put those all in. I got my handy clamp going there. And it worked really good to kind of fasten one end and then use a square, make sure it's square. Well, you put one screw in, then make sure it's square, and then you can go ahead and fasten the other end. And the clamp really helped to keep it in place. So I highly recommend those Kreg jig clamps. And I'll include links down in the video description for any of the tools that I'm using, like all the different Kreg jig stuff that I use throughout this video, which I found so super handy. And if you do any other kind of DIY projects, they are well worth it, I think. So I will include links for those down there. And if you do buy them through my link, it won't cost you any extra, but it will help to support my channel. I'll get a small commission for that, so that would be greatly appreciated. Now for the front of the shelves, I got this bandit edge banding, and it is pretty cool stuff. It makes it look so much better. I wanted it on the face there, and this is white birch in particular. It looks very, very close to the maple. So I recommend that one if you do the maple, and I will link to that where you can find it as well. And this stuff is just pre-glued and you iron it on, so you have to sand ahead of time. This is the 3/4 inch width because that's the width of my shelves. I don't know if they make it in different widths or not, but that's what I'm using. And I'm using a 220 grit sandpaper to sand the face there. And then I'm using an iron with some aluminum foil on it. You can use that or craft paper, they say, and do it on the cotton setting when you do this. And once you get it nice and hot, of course it'll regulate temperature if it's a decent iron. And then you just want to prep that, make sure to sand it really well, and it should take it really well. So here I am just sanding some different angles, so you can see. Did a few time lapses of that. Then I pre-cut it to length. You can just cut it with a scissors, and you can iron it on there. And again, the one mistake I made was making my shelf out even with the front, so you want to make sure to leave yourself at least a ½ inch there if you're going to put hinges in, or else you're going to have to notch it later like I had to do, which you'll see probably in the second video. You'll see how I had to do that, but I'll show you a little clip of that as well. So, but it worked really good. I just used my son's Play-Doh roller because that's all I could find, but they say to roll it on to get all the wrinkles out of it or whatever, which it doesn't really wrinkle, but you just kind of have to get a feel for how long to hold it on there. You don't want to burn it or anything, which the aluminum foil helps for that, but you want to make sure that it gets hot enough so that it stays on there, so it glues really well. Alright guys, so the next thing that I did, I'm building these face frames out of poplar wood. I like it because it's nice and easy to work with, and it's usually pretty straight. I sorted out some of the decent stuff. I got this at Home Depot. It's about $3 a foot for this 1x4, which is technically 3/4 by 3.5. But what I was going to share with you is I just wanted to visualize here what the face frames are going to look like, because in the corners they tend to be a little bit narrower because of the way that they meet up. But what I'm working on is the countertop's going to cover this. I did a little gap back here, so I spaced this one here a ½ inch. So that way, since this is a 3/4 inch thick, it's still going to get covered by this one by a 1/4 inch. So the ½ inch gap is back there, and then when the countertop is on, you'll never see that gap because it's going to be covered on the top. But this way, this leaves me with a 3¼ inch reveal here, which all these are going to be 3.5. And then this one would be 3.5, and I might end up planing this down a 1/4 inch just so it matches. I think that in my situation, with being that it's around a corner like that, you'll never see that difference right there, that 1/4 inch difference in the reveal. So that's why I'm clamping it this way, just to kind of get a visual for what it's going to look like. And I think that's going to work out good. So I put one here in the middle for the center just to see what that looks like there. And yeah, so I left these ½ inch end pieces off for now. I cut them, but I'm gonna paint them beforehand. So that's why I figured it'd be easier to at least get most of the painting done with them off. So when I'm doing the face frame, I have to account for that because I want to flush them up because of the freezer that's gonna sit here. A lot of times the face frame will hang over a 1/4 inch or so, but I'm gonna flush it up with the plywood once it's all done. So that's why I'm doing that. Anyway, so I just wanted to share with you kind of some ideas that you can get a visual. You can just kind of clamp the pieces up there, get a feel for how they're going to look like, and go from there. So to figure out how to do this face frame, I know math never lies, but sometimes there's a little bit of discrepancy in your build and stuff. So I like to put things right in place. I mean, I did a lot of marks here, but basically when I did the face frame, I don't have it gapped right now, but I laid it out as to the ½ inch gap that I want, and then I made a mark 3.5 for the width of material, and I figured out exactly where center is, which this is center, but I made my marks here. And then I also did the same here. But even doing that, I actually had to lay it out on the floor, and I spaced it since I want to have a ½ inch gap here to make my face frame look good, which I explained earlier. I wanted to, say for example, this whole thing was 65 3/8 for this whole complete measurement. And since I'm doing this section first, and then these are going to butt into it, so I deducted an inch because I'm doing a ½ inch on this side and a ½ inch on the other side. So that would be 64 3/8. But then what I did is I laid it out on the floor, and then I laid this out exactly in the center, and then I was able to measure in between. Because this is a little bit unique, this is the only centerpiece, but I'm still going to run this all the way long, I think, just so it looks the same, because I'm gonna run these up past and butt these in between, especially for here is where you'd notice it, because you don't want to see any end grain here. So you're going to run this piece on continuous, and the countertop will cover that end grain. That's why this one butts into it, because you'll never see that end grain. So I wanted to keep this the same for the center piece. So I had to figure out what my little pieces were in between. So they were 26 and 15/16. But it was easiest to do it laying out on the floor, which I already took it apart, so I can't show you that. But just to explain kind of my thought process, how I figured it out. And then next, to figure this end piece out, what I did, since I don't have the face frame built, I clamped this one in tight where it needs to go. So this has to be in place, and then I clamped the plywood, since I left it off for now, like I said, because I'm gonna paint it. But this is just a tad under 1/2 inch, so I wanted to make sure that is right in place. And then I flushed this up right here. Then I measured in between to see what this piece is gonna be. And if anything, I'm going to actually leave this hang over 1/16 of an inch, this face frame, rather than taking a chance of seeing the plywood. I'm going to err on the side of hanging this poplar over just a tad. So this face frame. So that's kind of my thinking on that. So I measured it out, and that's how I'm getting those dimensions. All right, guys, I'm working along here in my shed, so never mind the mess. It's kind of a mess. But I wanted to show you a couple different Kreg jig options. And I would really recommend getting one of these. This will make it so much nicer to do this project, and you'll be able to use it for a lot of projects in the future. I'll include links down in the video description for different ones of these if you want to check them out. Of course, there's different price ranges. So this one here is the cheapest one. This is the Kreg mini jig kit, and you almost have to have a clamp like this as well, which I will link one of these as well. So this is a Kreg clamp. There's different sizes of these, but the smaller one will work. So what you do basically is you just clamp this where you need it to go, and there's instructions with it. So it comes with that. So this next one is the Kreg R3 jig. This is the next step up. So this is a little bit nicer. It actually has a spot here for the clamp to go into, and then it allows you to do 2 holes instead of just one like this one, because you have to do this one and move it over. So it comes with a nice little set. This one, I think you have to buy the bit and stuff separately. This one comes with the bit and an Allen wrench. So this is a nice little one to have. I went one step up and got this one. This is the K4 Master System, and I'll show it to you set up here on my workbench. So what I did is I actually screwed it down into my workbench just to make it more stable. And then it's just nice because you can actually put the piece in and clamp it. So if it's, say for example here, I have my 3 1/4 inch, and you can adjust this for different width of wood, so it can do all different kinds. And then, so it's really secure, really stable for you to drill. Then if you're gonna do 3 to 4 inch boards, you can drill on the outer 2 holes. If you're doing a really narrow one, you can use these 2. And then if you're doing ones that are between 2 and 3 inches, you can use these 2. So it shows you that in the book. But basically, just to show you how that works, and then I'll show it to you in action. So the next thing is setting up your drill bit, which it'll show you that in the instructions as well. But it has a handy little gauge here on this system where you can set it up right for 3 1/4 inch there. And then you lock it down with an Allen wrench. And then that's what you use to drill in here. So if I set this in here, then that shows you how much it has to go down. I did a little test piece, and I recommend if you have any left over, do a little test piece. So when I was using this jig here, I thought that I had problems the other day because I had this right on 3 1/4, even though I'm using the 3 1/4 inch material. I did a little test piece, and it still was just a little bit off. So what I found out, it seems to work pretty good. Initially, I went between the 1/2 and 3 1/4, but this one I went just a little bit shy of the 3 1/4, and then it seemed to work. If I went all the way right on 3 1/4, the screws, when I put them in, right in here, on the other side, they tended to want to just bump the wood up a little. They didn't poke through quite, but they wanted to bump the wood up a little. This is just a test piece right here. So it's that easy. It just goes down in there, and then it bottoms out when it gets all the way, and that's the perfect depth. So then what you can do, I don't really have the best way to show this because I'm using short pieces in this example, but you can use this clamp and clamp it together, and it keeps the joints really nice and even. And then it'll tell you on the back of these screws what length that you need for the thickness. So I'm using 3 1/4 inch, so I need 1 1/4 screws, which is what these are. And they're also, there's fine thread for use with hardwoods. There's coarse thread for use with soft and plywoods, which the poplar is really soft, so that's what I'm using. So you can see these. So they're the exact length that they need to be so they don't stick through. So then all you have to do, they give you this really long bit that comes with it. So I don't have my tripod. I'm not sure if I can show this one-handed, but I'm going to try. So you just get that started down in there. And it just pulls it nice and tight. So you do that with both screws. So now you can see both screws down in there. And you can see if I flip this over, look how nice and even that is. And then they even have these things. They're like a paint grade plug that you can put in there. and you can fill these holes right here, but they're on the back side of the cabinet face frame, so I'm not worried about that, but just so you know, there is that option. So if you do get this one, it does tell you which holes to use on the clamp, on the drilling system, depending on the width of the material. So 3 to 4 inch, I was using the 2 outside holes, which is what I was doing for the most part on all these. I do have some that are 2 3/4, so they're almost 3. I checked and I just thought these screws were a little bit too close together for the 2 3 inch ones, so I ended up drilling them the same with the outside 2 holes, and it seems like it's going to work fine. So I was just going to show you here what I was talking about. These two, because they tell you A, B, C. So I've been using A and C on both because this is for my top frame. I had to rip these down to 2 3/4. These are just the full 3 1/2 right here. But so some of these are ripped down for the top of the face frame to 2 3/4, but I was still able to use the same placement for the spacing. So just want to show you how easy this thing is. You can just clamp it in. It locks it in for you, and so it holds it for you while you're drilling. And then you just want to make sure that you put your good side toward this side, and the back side where you're going to be drilling is the back side, which will have stickers and it won't be quite as nice. So you have to make sure to keep in mind that the nice outside one that you're going to see goes on this side. For screwing this face frame together, I'm just using this Gorilla wood glue because it's what I have. You can use Titebond or whatever. I think Titebond and Gorilla are both good brands for this. So whatever reason, the Kreg jig seemed to be a little bit off. When I did it on the test pieces, it was fine, but when I was doing it on the cabinet, it actually poked through. So what it was is I did it on the 3/4 setting like they said. I don't know if you can see down in here, but this was the original 2 holes, and I had enough material. I made these 2 holes, and I went halfway between the 3/4 and the 1/2 on the Kreg jig. I'll show you an example later, but that way the screw would still go in enough so it's not sticking out the head, but it was enough left in here that it won't stick out. I don't know why it's doing it, because these material are all 3/4, they're all the same, but that's why I had to do this. So I ended up having to, on these narrow pieces, I had to do these 2 in the middle. So I'm hoping that if I glue it good, that will still hold just fine. Okay, so overall it would have been a lot easier if I had a nice workbench or a 4x8 sheet of plywood to work off of up on a workbench, because you could see I had a little trouble with getting it lined up when I was on the floor like that, just because of the clamp taking up a couple inches right there. So I ended up being able to get it though with a little bit of propping up with some boards and stuff like that. But yeah, overall I'm really happy how it turned out. Came out nice and flush overall and even there. So took a little finagling, but if you have like a workbench or something like that, that would be a lot easier, where you could hang it out over the edge and clamp it. All right guys, so I'm just out here sanding on my workbench to try to get this pretty nice. So I used a 220 grit. I used a sander like this. So this is just what I had on hand. So that's what I'm using. And yeah, so you can see 220 grit on that. Then I also have some here in a hand sander that's 220 that I'm using just to hit the corners a little bit. I don't want to get too close in the corners, like here, for example, with the random orbital sander. So I'm just hand sanding right in the very corner. So just did a nice job, and I think it's going to look good. I did some research, and it seemed like 220 grit is what people say for paint grade cabinets. So I think 320 would just be a little too glossy. So if you do need to fill some places, I recommend this stuff. It's DAP plastic wood, and it is the alcohol-based stuff. And it is really good, really durable from what I've been told. So I don't know if you can see those. They look pretty bad in here, but this is the spot where the screws stuck through on the Kreg screws. And so I chipped them out and filled them up. So got to wait 15 minutes to sand them, it says. So you can read the instructions of that if you do get that. I got all the face frames sanded. I'm really happy how they came out overall. Nice and smooth. Up here is where I had to fill those holes, and they came out really nice as well with that DAP wood filler. All right guys, so I'm doing doors now, door assembly. So I did a little test piece, and I recommend if you have any left over, do a little test piece. So I was going to point out these pocket hole paint grade plugs that you can use. And the thing is if you don't have your screw in quite as much, they don't go down quite as much. So you have more sanding to do. So you can leave it that way and sand it off, because you put these in and glue them in. But the nice thing with these plugs is it saves you a lot of wood filler if you want to use those. This is the test piece that I did with the wood fillers, and they sand off nice and even, you can see like that. So I think once they're primed, they'll be perfect. But right here, it made a little bit of a hole. So I think I'm just going to go through with wood filler. Again, this is just a scrap piece, and that's what I would recommend you guys doing, is testing it out on a scrap piece. But I think you can just fill these holes with wood filler and then sand them down again, and then they should be good. My door pieces, when I was cutting them, the way I figured them, so my overall opening was 29.5, so for height, so I went an inch oversized because I want to have it stick over a 1/2 inch top and bottom and side to side. And I'm going to build the doors like this, where the side pieces, the long ones, uprights, run past, and then the short ones go in between, because you're going to see top grain on the door a little bit, but you really won't notice it that much because of the countertop. And so you want to build them this way. At least that's what I want to do. So what I like to do also when I'm laying out the door is I like to figure out which is the best side and turn that just on here, just like I'm going to build it. And then that way I know how I'm going to drill these, because I'm going to drill these on the back side. The short ones are the only ones that get drilled. And then I can assemble them when I'm done. Pardon my workbench, it's dirty, but there's stain on it and I can't get it off. And this is the only spot I have to work, so. Overall, this has been going a lot better than the face frame build with doing it up on the sawhorses like this. But the main thing to keep it from splitting, I had one that split out a little bit right here, is I ended up having to back the screw out when I did that, but I'm clamping right over where I'm screwing, directly over this, and then directly over this end when I screwed this in. So I haven't had any problems on this second door by doing that. So a couple tips that I've learned: make sure that your drill is in number 1 on low so you don't overdrive the screws. And then just put them in slowly, nice and slowly. So like this one I put in and I clamped directly over it. And then I move the clamp out here and clamp directly over it. Make sure you're clamping hard enough. And then when I drive the screw, I drive it nice and slow and make sure to just snug it, don't over tighten it. So also I'm using a glue like Gorilla Wood Glue here. You can use Tight Bond as well. That's a really good brand. I think I mentioned that when I was doing the face frames. What I like to do on this, if I have 3 of them together except the last corner, you can just lift this up a little bit. It has some flex to it. And then you can tip it up even if you want. You can just add glue. Make sure that you add enough glue. Don't do too much or it'll just squeeze out. But make sure you got plenty on there. Even if it squeezes out a little bit, it won't hurt because you'll just sand it away. But you can wipe it when you're all done assembling this. But make sure there's enough in there, just it'll help make it stronger. So I just make sure that that's lined up perfectly on the edge. Then I usually put this one in first and then this one. You can see it pulled tight there when the screw was in, just snug. Sometimes the wood is just a little bit different thickness between the two. So make sure to have this clamp cover as far as you can, just so it doesn't interfere with you putting the screw in that hole right there. If you have it covered in the hole, then the head of the screw will hit as it's going in. When you're all done doing the doors, then you can put these pocket hole plugs in, these paint grade ones. But then all you do is just put some glue in here. A little extra glue is okay. And these things are going to stick up a little bit. That's okay, because you're going to sand that all down once they're dry. So a little extra glue won't hurt. You can wipe it off if you want. Makes them look so much better when they're done. So I'm back out here in my shed doing some sanding on these doors here. And I decided to, right after I glued these up, the door frames, I plugged them with those plugs and glued them in. But now doing that, before I can route this groove in here, this slot for the back panel, then I have to sand these down, otherwise my router would bump into them. So I'm actually using 120 grit Diablo sandpaper. That's just what I have. And you could even probably use something coarser than that, but it takes that right off. See, these stick up like a 16th or a little more than that. But that does a really nice job of just taking that right down to smooth. So then once I'm all done, of course, I'll hit it all with 220 when I'm all done. But for now, I just want to get it down so that I can get it routed. So you could wait to do the plugs until after you route if you are going to do the same way that I did. So one of the most exciting parts of the build, I've been waiting to use this tool. I got this cordless router, so this is a Milwaukee Fuel. I got this because I already have the Milwaukee lineup. So I would highly recommend getting one of these, a cordless router. They're so nice because you don't have any cords to deal with. So whatever brand you use, whether it's DeWalt or Milwaukee or Makita, I think that they are very much worthwhile getting it because you'll use it in a lot of projects down the road, hopefully. And they really aren't that bad price. I think I picked this up for 130 bucks. I'll include a link down in the video description where I got mine, and you can check out some different options based on what you have. I'll probably just link the cordless routers and then you can look at your brand. So this is the Makita Fuel, like I was saying, and I'm so stoked to get it. So the other thing that I know that you're going to ask questions about is what for bit to use for this. What I'm doing is I'm getting a rabbiting bit. This one here in particular is a Bosch, but you can get different brands. The Diablo makes a really good one. This is what they look like. They have a 1/4 inch shank. It's 1.25 inches total. It's a 1/2 inch deep, but it comes over a 1/2 inch from this bearing right here. So this is a 1/2 inch. This is what I'm looking for. And this is what I'm going to use. And I set the depth with the plywood that I'm going to use. So you can kind of see right there. So you can set the depth with the very furthest part that sticks down like this. And then I would highly recommend doing a test piece first before you go ahead and do your doors. So I'm going to set a door here for an example. This is why I built the doors first and then did this, because I knew I was going to be using the router. If you don't have the router option, you don't want to buy one, you don't want to go that route, maybe you can borrow one, but if you can't, I would recommend probably doing it on a table saw. There's a little trick you can do with cutting the relief on the table saw, if you're going to do it the way that I do it anyway. So I'm going to do a little bit out of here and inset the plywood basically so it's flush with the backside. That's my goal. And so that's why I want to show this to you. So, but if you do the trick with the table saw, you probably want to do this before you assemble it. You just want to be careful and not go quite all the way. So you want to stop wherever that is that you want to do that, and you can just chisel it or something. That's what I'm planning to do, because the router is going to just take a curve out of this corner. Otherwise it'll get everything with the corner, but I can just chisel and cut out the rest of it square. So that's my plan, what I'm planning to do there. So I wanted to show you that, and yes, I will link to this exact bit also that I'm using if you want to go this route. It is a rabbiting bit, and I showed you the dimensions earlier, but I will link to try to find that exact one for you. So this is why I recommend using a test piece first. Make sure you get it right. I tried this side first, and it was just a little bit too shallow, so I switched to this side, and I got a little scrap of the plywood that I'm going to be using, and I got it just there, like it's just a tad low if anything, but I'd rather have it that way for when I sand it. That'll be perfect. And yeah, so I think this is going to work out really good. All right, so I'm set up here on my little workbench to do the routing. This is the way that I figured out how to do it. I'm going to do it on the back side, of course, and I'm going to clamp it to my workbench like this and just go careful around there. And the corners are going to be rounded for now with the router bit. I'm just going to have to chisel them out later, but this should do a really nice job if I go slow and careful. Okay, that was messy, but it was a lot of fun. So you can see how it turned out overall. So this is where I was talking about. It follows the radius of the corner there. So it leaves a little bit of a round there. So you just have to chisel that out straight when you're done, or cut it out. But man, that was a lot of fun. So it was messy, but I got it all done. And here's where you want to be careful. I had mentioned earlier about keeping your screws, when you screw it together, keep it away from the edge a little. So that's why I did that. And then also when you clamp it, which I clamp it just so it stays good on my workbench here, when you clamp it, you want to make sure you leave enough space in here. Mine has 1.75 inches here from this to here, so I wanted to make sure that it cleared that when I was routing it so it didn't mess me up. and it did a good job there. So I was able to just clamp on both sides, just on the edge, and it held it good. I'm really happy how that turned out. So I'm just using a chisel that I have here, and it's pretty sharp, and I was able to get the corner cleaned out very nicely there. Just kind of take your time. I found this was just my personal thing, but if I kind of square up with what's there and then line up this way, get it scored, and then come this way and score it right in the corner and just clean it up a little at a time. The nice thing with poplar, if you use poplar, is it does peel pretty nice. I also thought about it as I am chiseling out the corners here, that it's easier probably now, before I put the back panel in, to sand this edge right here. So I'm using 220 grit on the hand sander just a little bit, and I'm going to sand all this before I glue in the back panel. So I'm just gluing these up on the floor. I'm using paint cans for weights. You can use something just to hold it in place. And again, I'm using the Gorilla Wood glue. You can use something like this or Type Bond 2 or something like that. They're both really good glues, I believe. So I think this is going to work really well just to glue them in. I thought about using pins to pin them in as well, but I think the glue will hold just fine. So when I'm gluing up these door backs, I don't like to put too much glue on there. I like to put like a nice light bead. And it's okay if a little bit squeezes out, but then you'll have to flip it over and clean it. At least that's what I like to do. Get it on there, get it in place, and then squeeze it. And then anything that'll come out, you can get on the front side and clean it before it dries. One thing I was a little concerned about was the barcodes on these, about getting them off because they're very sticky. But I had a friend actually told me this, and it works pretty good. I had some sandpaper that's 150 grit, and you can designate just one for all the stickers if you want on your project. And just hit them with sandpaper and go a little bit deeper than what you think you need to, and it'll get the residue and everything. So yeah, got it right off. Got all the sticky residue and everything. So yeah, because my concern was if you heat it up with the hair dryer or something to peel it off, it might end up driving some of the residue deeper than what it would be. So just sanding it like that with a little coarser grit seems to do a really good job. So for the doors, before I sand them, I know I talked about this plastic wood before, this DAP. It's the alcohol-based stuff. I got the white color, but you can get whatever color because it's going to be painted. You can get natural as well. But basically, where I had plugged and sanded these things, you can see there's a little bit of a spot right there where it doesn't get quite perfect. So I'm just putting the wood filler on there. And then if you want, if your gap is a little bigger than what you like on the door, you can fill that in. I'm not as worried about that, but some places where the plywood chipped out a little bit on the backside, I am filling that. Like there's one. So just things like that. But I especially am watching these plugs, filling them a little bit, and corners, like this corner is a little big, so I'll probably fill those. So that stuff works really good. It hardens in like 15 minutes, so you can sand it in like a half an hour, I think, or so, but it's really good stuff. Don't worry if you get a little too much on there because it sands off really easily. So the main thing is you want to get extra, if anything. So I'm just using a little stick of wood here to put it on. You can use like a little spatula, a little scraper, a little knife, whatever you want to use, like a drywall knife. But yeah, basically whatever you want. And you can do whatever you want. Like if you want to fill this gap up all the way, you can do that. I'm going to just sand this, and if I want a little bit of a gap there, like if I want it to look uniform, then I'll just carve that out with a knife so it looks uniform when I'm done, because it's hard to fill a little bit of that without filling the whole gap, you know. So I think the paint will fill some of that up, the paint and primer, if it's just a really small gap. So for doing the hinges on the doors, I wanted to show you guys this little jig from Kreg Jig. It is such a handy little jig, and it works for putting the hinges in there at the correct depth. I'll show you a little scrap piece that I did, and I would highly recommend doing a scrap piece just to test it out first. So this does the exact size that you need, and for this exact hinge, it needs to be set back 3 millimeters. So that's how far it allows this to set back right here. You can see if I flip the door over, what I mean. See those things right there? They have different thickness that you can do. So that's what spaces the hinge, how far back it goes from the edge right here. So that's why that is. So what you do is you get clamps, and I'm using the actual Kreg Jig clamps. You might be able to make something else work, but these are non-marring, so they work good for finished surfaces. And then they're handy throughout the whole project anyway. But so I'm clamping on either side, and what I decided to do for spacing down from the top and the bottom is I'm going 2 3/4, so it has measurements up here. So you can decide what you want to do there. That's what I settled on, just so it's not too close to the outside edge for splitting and stuff. So it does also come with a 1/16 drill bit, so you can pre-drill for your screws right there. So you want to do that before you take the jig loose. So the other thing, you want to make sure to not have your drill bit stick down too far, because otherwise it could drill down through the face frame of your door. So they say to do a 7/8 of an inch, and that's what I set this on. They say to use like a piece of masking tape so you can see how far to drill. But I found it's easy just to put it in the chuck and measure it and make sure that it's no more than a 7/8. Because the jig itself is a 1/2 inch, so that means it goes 3/8 inch into your door frame. So that seems to work out pretty good. This is the other part that drills the actual hole. So it has a bit that comes with it, and then this here just locks into this part right here. So I'll try to show you in the video a little bit how it works. So there, it's locked in. And then this part, you kind of saw how that works, but when you initially set it up, it just is made so that it bottoms out right there. So it goes against that and stops. So that is the perfect depth that you need to get down through that part without going all the way through. So it is really pretty easy how it works, and that is a very handy jig to have. It's about $29 or $30 for this whole complete jig, but I think it's well worth the money to get that. You can see it's the perfect depth for the hinge to set in, and got pre-drilled for the holes right there for the screws. And it just does such a nice job. So as I'm drilling this, I was just going to say I decided to do 3 hinges on this door because it is an extra big door. And also the hinges that I got, they come in a 20 pack, so I'm going to need 18 of them. So I'm going to put 3 in there, and that way it should be extra strong for little boys hanging on them. So like I said, on these doors, I've been drilling them, so I'm 2 3/4 inches on this mark right here. You can see it has marks on there. So for the center, what I do is I measured the overall door, which is 30.5. So I went half of that, 15.25, and I just made a mark in here where I know it's going to get drilled out anyway. And you can see it has a center mark here and here, so you can just line it up, and that is right on for your center one. Also, you probably saw me in the time lapse, but every time I clamp, I also pick it up just to make sure that it is seated down all the way tight against those blocks, and then I know that it's good, just to double check it. Alright guys, well this seems like a really good place to end it for part 1. I'm going to be doing a part 2, so be sure to subscribe to my channel and watch out for that. This is just a sneak peek of what the cabinet turned out like, and it turned out really good. Really like how it turned out. So be watching out for that next video. I may even do a part 3 where I do the open shelving above it later, but for right now it's going to be 2 parts for this pantry cabinet build itself. So yeah, keep an eye out for that, and hopefully I'll be able to get it done before too long. So subscribe, appreciate it, give me a thumbs up if you found this helpful, and thanks for watching guys.